for our work on ceasefire in New Jersey, gun control, and issues of peace more broadly. And this makes especially relevant for us today a presentation from a speaker whom I've known for 20-odd years, Joe Cirincione, but I guess Americanized would be Cirincione, whose biography is briefly summarized here. But I think that it's better to know that he had actually grown up within sight of the spires of another wannabe Gothic, neo-Gothic collegiate institution in New Haven, and had gone to the Notre Dame Boys High School in East Hampton, then went to Boston College. So the Notre Dame High School was the Brothers of the Holy Cross, and Boston College was the Jesuits, and he has somehow survived that. His service first in the Congress was as a staffer on important committees, House Armed Services, under Les Aspin, a legend from the 80s and early 90s, and then Defense Secretary. Government Oversight, John Conyers. He ran the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace's Non-Proliferation Program, has written books about non-proliferation and nuclear arms control. He led the Stimson Center's campaign to extend the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was, let us remember, a significant accomplishment in 1995 of the Clinton administration. They were able to put this through that the treaty regime would not be subject to renewal every 5 years, which presented opportunities for all kinds of mischief to get it renewed for the next 5 years. Who demands what? But to make it permanently part of the foundation system of international law, which admittedly right now, international law and all of its foundations are subject to a searching critique by some in Washington. He went to work as vice president for national security at the Center for American Progress. That's where we collaborated for a couple of years, and then became president of the Plowshares Fund. He is a fabulously entertaining and riveting speaker, so I am building him up so that he either meets the test or I will get booed afterwards. So, Joe Cirincione.
Nothing like setting the bar too high. That's great. Thank you very much, Jeff, and congratulations to you on your 42nd year. That's quite an accomplishment to be this engaged, this active, this effective for 42 years and still 45. Fighting. 45? Oh, I'm sorry, I misread the program. 45. Oh, congratulations. That's just wonderful. Just wonderful. I am hoping to speak to you today for about 30 minutes. Let me set my timer here, and then open it up for Q&A so we could have some discussion, because there's a lot to discuss. We are in perhaps the most difficult period of our lives, and I too escaped the Vietnam War by one position. My draft number in 1971 was 135. They stopped at 134. So I too, that was my most dangerous year. But today's challenges are different. They're national, they're global. So I've been working on an analysis of this that I've been talking to some people about. I hope to refine this into an article, so I'd appreciate being able to have this discussion with you. I call this talk, Where Are We? How do we get out of here? And the where are we, of course, is we are still living in the nuclear age. For 80 years now, despite having the best leadership, the most dedicated people working on this issue, we escaped nuclear catastrophe, as the late Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, said, by sheer luck. So often. And now there are new developments and new actors that are introducing new risks into this already volatile mix of geopolitical rivalries, human fallibilities, rapid launch doctrines. This new reality requires some new thinking. So how do we do that? How do we understand where we are? Well, first, we have to orient ourselves, observe what's going on, and understand what our strategic situation is. And for me, that has a number of components. First, we have to recognize that we are in a dangerous new nuclear arms race. The first time we've been in a nuclear arms race since the early 1980s, when I started on the House Armed Services Committee. Second, we must understand that those favoring global stability and nuclear risk reductions are in strategic retreat. That means that our goal has to be to minimize our losses and try to prevent the worst from happening. There can and will be victories, but these are going to be tactical, not strategic. It's highly unlikely that anything in this period that we're now in can fundamentally change the orientation, the course that we're on. Third, we have to understand that with skill and luck, we can do that, prevent the worst from happening, and thus prepare for when we are able to go back on the offensive again. Maybe in 2 years, maybe in 4 years, but we can't blow this opportunity. We have to go into that new period of opportunity prepared with programs, with organizations, with coalitions, with alliances. And this is extremely difficult because the challenges we face is not one or two. It's not just Donald Trump. We have challenges across the board: outdated doctrines, out-of-control budgets, entrenched bureaucracies, unstable leaders among them. And we live in this period where global and domestic restraint mechanisms are disappearing, including arms control. That regime, painstakingly built by liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats over the years, is being taken apart. This is intentional. It's not just dying of neglect. Those who have opposed arms control for all those years are now in control, are now in charge, and they are dismantling these structures. Our own leadership, the leadership in the current Department of Defense, is the most ideological and least competent leadership we've ever had in the nuclear age. And these are the people who are governing our strategy and our nuclear policy. But in order to plot a new course, we first have to understand how we got lost. How did we get here? How did we go from a period just 16 years ago when we had a president of the United States, young, charismatic, bold, well-intentioned, talking about and now publicly embracing the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons, to a world where we have an arms race, where we have a $100 billion a year nuclear budget, where every single one of the 9 nuclear-armed states are building new nuclear weapons? How did we get from those hopes to today's fears? For example, arms control is not dead, but it's almost dead. Could these agreements have been stronger? Was their strategy wrong? Why didn't the Biden administration make any changes at all to our nuclear policies, posture, and budgets? What went on there? That analysis has not been done. And we have to understand how we screwed this up. And I don't mean just them, but how did we make these mistakes? What went wrong? Because with that, the second realization is we have to acknowledge that the arms control and disarmament groups are not dead, but they are dying. They are getting weaker every day. Donors are leaving the field, not entering the field. We are shrinking. So those of us who hope to shape and implement responsible nuclear policies for the rest of this century must confront our collective failure. There has not been a meaningful step that physically reduced nuclear dangers since the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, and that is no longer with us. Before that, it was the 2010 New START Treaty, and that is expiring next February. The last remaining restraint on US and Russian nuclear weapons, will die in February unless action is taken. Now, there have been major steps forward, and we're blessed to have Alexander with us, who was one of the global leaders that led the campaign for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a landmark agreement that was passed in 2017, entered into force in 2021, and now has 73 nations of the world. I mean, this was done by governments and NGOs working together, a remarkable achievement. Nothing has been done like it, but it didn't make any material change in the nuclear arsenals of the world. It is a building block for the future, but it is not a solution for the current arms race that we're in right now. There is little reason to expect that we can have a measurable impact on the future without a frank assessment of what's gone wrong and some serious reorganization and reorientation. We will have targets of opportunity, the Sentinel, the Golden Dome, absolutely ludicrous, absurd programs, in many ways dying of their own weight, but we're not going to kill them in the next couple of years. So what will be our plan to get rid of these programs when we have the chance? We don't have one yet. Third, we have to have a understanding of the unique nuclear risks of this current period of the nuclear age. For those of you who follow this, there's sort of a trend in analytical writings these days to talk about the new nuclear age. And this has a left and a right variant. People on the left talk about it one way, people on the right talk about it the other way. I recently critiqued, for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientist, an article by some of my colleagues, people I know who wrote an article in Foreign Affairs on the new nuclear age. These are two former Biden administration nuclear officials, Vipin Narang and Pranay Vadi, now up at a new center that was just established at MIT, working on nuclear policy. And they argue that there are new dangers that make this particular period different from all other periods, a new nuclear age that requires us to build more nuclear weapons. These are Democrats. This is the Biden administration. They argue basically that the key change that they and the people on the right who do this argue the key that there is changes in new technologies. There are new nations trying to get new nuclear weapons. There are some of our U.S. allies are considering getting nuclear weapons, but mostly the entire argument rests on China, because China is not just building nuclear weapons to replace the ones they have, they're expanding their arsenal. They're one of several countries who are doing this, but they're doing it very dramatically, doubling the number of warheads they've had over the last 5 years, for example. Some projections indicate that they could double it again over the next 5 to 10 years. They believe, both on the left and the right, that the current arms control mechanisms are basically irrelevant, that the only way to meet these challenges is to develop more nuclear weapons. Let me just go into this just for a bit so you understand what I'm talking about. So this is sort of a left, a sort of a soft, a liberal version of what the Strategic Posture Commission did, a congressionally appointed, heavily conservative strategic commission, the recommendations they came up with a couple of years ago. They argue, Vipin and Pranay argue in their piece, that the interest of U.S. allies in Europe and Asia in considering their own national nuclear programs, so Germany is considering this, South Korea is considering this, Japan is considering this, there's active discussion in these, that the only way to answer that is to implement more different and better nuclear capabilities and more advanced missile defense systems to intercept small or residual adversary nuclear forces. This is the lingo of the nuclear strategists. They argue that if confronted by nuclear threats in Europe or in the near future in Asia, the United States must need to respond with nuclear use and potentially with larger nuclear exchanges if it's unable to reestablish nuclear deterrence in Europe. So these are Biden administration officials saying this, and I would say that this is the Washington consensus. This is the view in Washington. This is what most people think. This is how think tanks proceed at the current moment. They're bought in to this. So, and these elements in both Democrats and Republican parties, both on the right and the left, they fully endorsed this third nuclear buildup we're in. The first was in the 1950s and 1960s. The second was in the 1980s. And we're now in a third nuclear buildup with an estimated cost of $2 trillion and rising. All that isn't enough for these new thinkers, these new age thinkers. Washington needs to deploy not only more warheads, but also more systems than originally planned under the modernization program, they urge. So that's the view. I consider this view of a new nuclear age strategically wrong, technically weak, and immoral in its application of nuclear force, of the way they imagine nuclear forces. I'm one of those people who think that nuclear weapons are immoral. And by one of those people, I mean Pope Leo, I mean Pope Francis, I mean the Anglican Church. I don't know about the Presbyterians, but I bet they have a position on this, that these are weapons that no one should have for any reason whatsoever. That deterrence based on the threat to extinguish all of humanity is fundamentally immoral. Amen. So it's one of those words we never talk about when we talk about nuclear policy, morality. But it goes deeper. For me, that's pretty deep, but for me, it's also strategically bankrupt. That they are ignoring the real change that has taken place over the last decade or so. For the first time in the history of the nuclear age, the vast majority of nuclear weapons in the world are held by authoritarian regimes. Now, we've gotten used to authoritarian regimes with nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union, China, the most recent entry to the nuclear club, North Korea in 2006. And they'd be up on the map of this as red. They'd be the dangers. And the rest of the countries that had nuclear weapons, they were blue. They were democratic governments. They were responsible nuclear powers because they were countries that were based on what we consider moral democratic principles. And although we had to have these dangerous weapons, we would be responsible. We wouldn't, of course, use these nuclear weapons. Well, that's changed dramatically. In the past, we had cases of authoritarian regimes acquiring nuclear weapons. Now we have nuclear weapon states acquiring authoritarian regimes. And when you just think about it, about the last 10 years, India, authoritarian. Pakistan, authoritarian. Israel, authoritarian. The United States of America, authoritarian. Now, you can argue over what stage of an authoritarian regime we're in. I remember being struck back in August when I heard, August 4th, I think, Rachel Maddow on her show talk about, it's not coming, it's here. We are in an authoritarian regime, and we're now in the process that regime is trying to consolidate its rule. That's the struggle we're in. I got a chance to talk to Rachel about this. I've known her for many years, and maybe some of you remember her from her Air America days, and so I knew her back then. And I saw her up in Cape Cod, where I summer now, and we talked about this, and she's dead serious. I mean, that's the phase we're in, and you see many people think that that's the situation we're in right now. Okay, so what does this mean? If that's the case, if that's the strategic situation, how do we deal with this? So first we need greater analysis of this. We have to understand the risks that are present, and I'm not smart enough to do that analysis. But I think I'm onto something here. And I think if we work on this together in various places, we can come up with a real analysis of the new nuclear age that we're in, not one that's tailor-made for the production of more nuclear weapons. And some of the aspects that we can talk about this are understanding 7 of the 9 nuclear arsenals are under the control of strong men who can launch these weapons whenever they want, for whatever reason they want, including here in the United States. So with some of the many issues we work on, some of them are under that control issue. Who gets to decide? In the United States, it's only the president. In some other countries like China, there's a committee of people that do this, but since it's an authoritarian regime, how free is that committee to actually differ with President Xi's interests, for example? So we have to be making the case for and arguing and preparing for taking action on no first use, being a country's pledge never to be the first to use it, and sole authority. The president, particularly an unstable megalomaniac president rapidly losing touch with reality, should not be able to decide on his own when to launch a nuclear weapon. That seems obvious. And yet it is our law. That is the way it works. We got to change that. It doesn't have to be that way. It didn't used to be that way. It's not inherent in nuclear weapons that be the authority. So we have to be working on this, emphasizing this, strategizing about this, talking about this. Then we have to understand that authoritarian states are more prone to war. Most of them have vast, even grand, territorial ambitions that require them to threaten or actually go to war with their neighbors. Russia wants Ukraine. China wants Taiwan. India and Pakistan want Kashmir. Israel wants Gaza and the West Bank. North Korea wants South Korea. Donald Trump wants Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, sometimes Gaza. And it's funny, right? Except he's dead serious. And that's not even his most recent pronouncements about the enemy within. This is what and this is the way authoritarian leaders take. They believe in this geopolitical reality that their strength is based on territorial aggrandizement. That this is the way you break up the powers. This is what it means to be a great power. We have more land, we have more resources, and then we can deal with you, your other great powers, and we'll divvy up the world as we say, as we wish. And that these desires for more territory, for more control, increase the threats of nuclear use and increase the possibility that nuclear weapons will be used. Vladimir Putin has made more nuclear threats in the 3 years of the Ukraine war than all the other nuclear-armed states have made in the past 80 years. I haven't actually documented that, but I believe that to be true. I mean, it's just... That's the way Putin talks. It is his major currency of power, one of his major currencies of power. He wants to keep reminding, and it works. It held the United States back from giving Ukraine the kind of support we should have been giving them all this long, all this period. Netanyahu alludes to his nuclear options in the Gaza war in rebutting charges of genocide. He said if we wanted to commit genocide, we could have done it in an afternoon. Well, what's he talking about? His 80 nuclear weapons, unacknowledged, but right there. Trump sprinkles in talk of nuclear reductions and getting rid of nuclear weapons with nuclear threats. He does it all the time. You remember in his first term, it was early marked by threats of fire and fury like the world has never seen. That's all there. I don't know what Trump thinks about nuclear weapons. Should we seize on some statements that he makes? As Kip points out, yes, we should. We should point that out. Trump is right. Yes, we shouldn't be developing new. Does he mean it? He's got a $100 billion budget plus $45 billion for Golden Dome. That is a lot of money. I think that's where his true intentions are better marked. A fourth aspect of this current situation is the weakening global order. Some leaders, like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, are actively dismantling the existing liberal international order, the structures that have basically governed the world and prevented conflict, not perfectly, but to a great degree over the last 80 years. Others, like Xi of China, seek to replace this structure with the global order benefiting them. See, for example, the Shanghai Cooperation Council and the kind of efforts China's making to create a different, more authoritarian global order. And fifth on my list of factors in this change is the weakening of the U.S. alliance system. I mean, that's a lecture in and of itself about the willful, wanton destruction of U.S. power over the last 7 months, starting with things like the soft power of the Peace Corps and aid and information exchanges around the world, but including the alliance system. One of the reasons countries like Poland and Germany and Finland are talking about getting nuclear weapons is that do not believe they can depend on the United States for us to risk our nuclear survivability for their national survivability. And they're not wrong to do so. But we are tearing down our own alliance system, an alliance system that has prevented a major war in Europe since the end of World War II, the longest period of peace in Europe's existing. That age is ending. There are more factors on this, but you get the point. This is the kind of thing we have to be thinking about, understanding this thing in full, understanding its component parts, and to orient ourselves to understand what we're up against. But then that gets to the organizational question. Okay, wise guy, what do we do about that? Very nice, very nice. Go back to your think tank in Washington. But what do you do? But for most of my life, I've been an activist, one way or the other. I've been doing things and trying to get people together, building alliances, building coalitions. I was a housing organizer for 10 years up in low-income housing projects in Massachusetts. And it's a question for groups like this. Should nuclear weapons continue to be our primary focus? It's an issue, I think, for think tanks, like at Princeton. If you're dedicated to nuclear weapons analysis, is that really your primary focus at this point? Is that really what you need? Or is the authoritarian threat the greatest challenge we face? If Trump succeeds, we are not going to have policy debates. We're not going to have debates. As Trump said in his UN address, there will be no nothing. So what are we doing? If we're working on this, working on issues, checking our checklist of things we like, and questionnaires to candidates, do you support this? If the big fight is over here, what are we doing over here? And that brings me to the organizational question, shouldn't we merge our nuclear efforts with those of groups resisting the consolidation of Trump's authoritarian regime in the United States? So let's talk about that. You may think that we have to stay true to our cause and that there are enough groups fighting Trump. This came up for me when I was the president of Plowshares Fund, which is dedicated to the elimination of nuclear weapons. We worried about mission creep. If we started taking on all these other urgent tasks, we weren't going to lose focus that was dedicated to, that people have given us money for. But you can do your own analysis, but I say, no, that's not true. You can't stay focused. You have to go to the barricades on this issue. And there are leaders who are warning us of the price of inaction. One of the great leaders that is emerging in this fight, and it's just been happening in the last couple of months, is the governor of Illinois, J.D. Pritzker. Yes. You know what I'm talking about. You see him. He is not intimidated. He is not afraid. And he said just this week, this is exactly the moment for people to stand up. And do I see enough people doing it? No, I don't. It shouldn't be that there are Democrats that are afraid, because you know what? We're the targets. We need to be strong. We need to fight back. And it turns out that the best way for us to advance our cause, for us to advance this issue of the elimination of nuclear weapons, of the reduction of nuclear risk, is to merge these issues with the growing and expanding mass movement against authoritarianism. I have always felt, and I did this at Plowshares, I did this at Carnegie, that we should bring our issue into the conversations that people were already having. And when those were conversations about the NPT, we brought in the issue of the US nuclear arsenal. That it wasn't just about stopping those guys from getting nuclear weapons, it was always about getting rid of our nuclear weapons. There were two sides of the same coin. You had to do them both together. So bring our issue into those discussions. When it was the budget, we bring our nuclear issue into the government budget discussions that for years dominated Congress. Remember all that talk about the debt? Remember those ticking debt clocks? Well, you want to save some money? I got a $100 billion budget here for you that we can go take a look at. You want to, and for liberal groups, you want to fund healthcare, you want to fund education, you want to fund an increased social security net for people. Well, we can pay for that. Here's a lot of waste, unnecessary programs we don't need. We can do that. And it may be that battle that we're having right now against authoritarianism is the conversation that people are having. More people are talking about this, I would say, than any other issue in the United States. And I wrap into that the economic conditions, because it's part of that. And that economic conditions discussion is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the complete failure of this government to provide for the needs of the people gets more and more apparent, whether it's premiums being raised in next week and letters from your insurance companies, whether it's the freeze that's going on right now with the government shutdown, or whether it's the inflationary costs that are about to wallop the U.S. economy, or the collapse of the stock market, which I personally think is almost inevitable at this point. All those things are going to be rolling out over the next couple of months and years. Those are the fights. Let's bring our issues into those fights. We can be the peace and security wing of the non-authoritarian movement, of the people who are resisting the regime we now have and are trying to build a better future. We are the ones who can provide the analysis for that, to bring that along. And I'm delighted to learn just in the last couple hours that I've been here that you're already doing that. I am literally preaching to the choir here. Because you were already doing it, and I want you to let more and more people know about this, that you are doing that. You being involved in nuclear weapons issue doesn't mean you don't go demonstrate. No, it means exactly, and you're not just demonstrating like those poor people in front of the White House that for years would hold their anti-nuclear. No, we're effective demonstrations with other people who are demonstrating for similar reasons. We're all in this together, and this movement is growing. This movement is developing. I don't know how you feel, Bob, but I think the demonstrations on the 18th are going to be the biggest mass demonstrations that America's ever seen. It's growing. So we should be part of that. We should be looking at that. We should be charting this new course together. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to require some humbling of ourselves, of understanding that we did things wrong. And understanding what those things were, and try to correct that so we don't repeat them in the future, so that we can build a movement that someday can actually allow us to enjoy the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 30 minutes. Let's go. Let's go. Sit down. Sit down.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was very challenging and enlightening. So I'd like to be egalitarian here and ask you, if you have a question to ask, to raise your hand. I'm going to number you off, and then one of our volunteers is going to be needed to help pass this mic around once I call your number. So I think right there, Jay, I got you to number 1. Number 2 is Carol. Number 3 right there all the way in the back. Who else? I got 3 on the list. 4, 5, 6 is Lou. Any more that want to be on the stack? 7. All right, let's take those 7 and see where that leaves us. So questioner number 1, Jay.
All right, thank you, Reverend. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It is very sobering to be in such an intellectual place of foreign policy and to really connect the domestic things happening at home to the foreign policy. So thank you so much for a wonderful keynote. My name is Jay Weingenker. I used to be a special advisor in the Biden White House doing domestic climate and energy policy. I'm a CFPA board member. I call myself the resident Gen Z member of the board, joyfully. Sir, my question is about the recent defense pact that came out this past week between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, the latter of which is a nuclear power. And we saw that really solidified after the Israeli attack on a residential neighborhood in Qatar. When I was younger, in my college classes, I grew up with the belief in the stability-instability paradox. I'm sure some of you have heard of that, right? It's this idea that if you have two nuclear powers going after each other, that they won't actually escalate war because they're afraid of mutually assured destruction. And the truth is, in the last several years, we've seen that paradox to not be true. And so my question for you, sir, is how does the U.S. actually denuclearize these authoritarian strongmen? Because we saw the Biden bear hug strategy with Netanyahu fail. We saw the jury is still kind of out with U.S.-India relations, and so I'll keep it an open-ended question. My question for you is really just what is the path forward here on denuclearizing these strongmen, these authoritarians?
Yeah. Well, number one, I don't know. Number two, here's what I think. I think that the way we've done it in the past has worked, and the way you do it in the past is you work on this together. That everybody has a piece of this. So you don't see a path that says, okay, Putin, you denuclearize. And we're going to keep the weapons we have because, you can trust us. Well, no, you do mutual, staged, phased, verifiable reductions. It's the only way it's ever worked. Richard Nixon started the process back in 1972 by putting a limit on the arsenals, and then we had Ronald Reagan, who turned out to be the greatest arms control president in history, come out with the START agreement that had equal, verifiable, phased reductions. That process that started in 1988, or you might think of Reykjavik, 87, starting the ball rolling, that process continued for all these years. So for the last 35 years, we've been going down, 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 down. That's now stopped. Let me take a tangent here for a second. There's a wonderful new film out called House of Dynamite. I got to do a screening of this at the Motion Picture Association in Washington a couple of weeks ago. I just wrote a review about it. It'll be in the New Republic tomorrow or Tuesday. It begins with white letters scrolling across the screen that says, at the end of the Cold War, the nations of the world cooperated to reduce the number of nuclear weapons in the world today. That era is now over. And that's how this film begins. It's excellent. It offers a number of issues. It illustrates the core problems that we're facing today in a way that we can all benefit from. More about that later. So that's the process for doing that. It has to start with the United States and Russia. Is it possible that Trump and Putin could agree to extend the New START treaty? Yes, it is. Extend isn't the right word because you can't extend it, but they could have an agreement that keeps the limits of where they are. The problem is people in the United States don't want to keep the limits. We want to increase the number of nuclear weapons we have, so we have the main obstacle. I think Putin would go along with this because he's in trouble.
Right.
So he might, but it has to start with us. But then you've got to quickly find a path to involve China. China is not interested in slowing down its nuclear weapons. Why? Because it's increasing its nuclear weapons because of what we're doing. It's not that China's on the march and they decided out of the blue that they could become a nuclear dominant power in the world. No, they see the United States spending $2 trillion on new offensive weapons and apparently an unlimited amount of money on defensive weapons. In other words, putting together a force that could be a first strike on their weapons, eliminate their weapons, and have a defensive shield that could then block any residual force from China. In the face of that, what's a country supposed to do? Of course they have to increase their nuclear weapons. So is there a way for us to talk to China about it? It's difficult. There are China scholars here who know much more about this than I do, but there's a start. Yes, you've got to bring China in. If you can get the United States and Russia to freeze, to say, no, we're not going to go anymore, and to say we would like to reduce, then it might be possible to bring China into this, and you could have a freeze reduction dynamic that would go on. But it has to be together. So it's not a campaign against authoritarianism, against authoritarians with nuclear weapons, because as I say, 7 of the 9 countries are authoritarian regimes. So it's everybody, it's all of us. It's only France and Britain that are the democratic holders of nuclear weapons at this point, and how long is that going to last? Short answer to a very complicated question.
Questioner number 2, remind me who you were? Who did I give the number 2 to? Oh yes, Carol Allen.
Thank you. I want to ask you to comment on how peace groups can work on the treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons.
There's somebody in this room who knows so much more about this than I do, and it's Alexander, and I'm wondering, is that allowed?
Yeah, that's fine by me.
Could you
if
give Alexander the mic and have him tell you this? Because Alexander and I met in around 2013, 2014, and he invited me to go to the Conference on Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear Weapons in 2014 in Vienna, and I was blown away. I had no idea there was this much civic activism going on in Europe. And I would walked into rooms filled 3 times the size of this room, filled with people 3 times younger than me. and it just blew me away. And since I was the head of a foundation at that point, we immediately started funding this movement that I knew nothing about. And they achieved success that I think very few people thought they could. So Alexander, answer the question.
Thanks, Joe. Great talk. And of course, I'm being put on the spot here. I really was not expecting that. I think it's extremely important for peace group and civil society to be engaged, and it is possible to be engaged one conversation at a time. What the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is doing, I disagree with what Joe said, that it doesn't have an impact. Yes, it is a building stone, but it actually it already has had a very significant impact in changing the discourse about nuclear weapons in much of the rest of the world. Of course, you focus on the discussion here in the US, and a similar discussion is going on in Europe. But if you talk to the Latinos, if you talk to much of the global South, while Western countries and nuclear countries are going more into the direction of nuclear weapons, much of the rest of the world is actually increasing the concerns. And the reason why they're doing this is because there is an increasing body of scientific evidence about the consequences of what happens if something goes wrong, and there is an increasing body of evidence about the risk of something going wrong. So it is about challenging the assumption that nuclear weapons bring security, when there is in reality much more reliable knowledge on the opposite side. So I think that's the conversation that is necessary, and of course it's specifically necessary in countries where the security discourse is so prevailing. So seek contacts with scientists, seek contacts with educators, and bring up these people, bring up these points, and challenge those who, often without much knowledge and without much reflection, just repeating the mantra that nuclear weapons are a guarantee of security, when in reality we have the evidence that the anything but a guarantee, they're in fact one of the most significant existential risks that all of us face.
Thank you. How many countries have ratified the treaty?
It's 74 that have ratified, and we're just under 100 that have signed it.
100 signed, 74 ratified. Thank you.
All right, questioner number 3.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back to the international perspective. I'm actually an intern at the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. And there's been some promising things happening at the UN, but every time I'm seeing a sort of equivalent setback. The independent scientific panel on the effects of nuclear war recently had its first meeting and got started. It's been, again, since the 80s, since there was a UN report on this, and once that panel releases its report, that could be a great rallying point for civil society across the world. but at the same time, there's no funding at all for any of that panel's activities, and the whole UN budget is in crisis. Went last week to permanent mission of Austria had a event on
New stuff.
on encouraging New Start the UN to gather support across the United Nations to encourage Russia and the US to maintain the limits of New Start. But essentially the same day, Russia announced that it would absolutely no longer be, it would use its, I think, 34 tons of plutonium that had been agreed to be taken out of weapons use. So I'm just wondering, what can civil society do now to encourage these things before they come to fruition and serve as a rallying point? How can civil society make sure that these things actually progress forward?
So my analysis of that is that we can't do that now. That there is no strategic turning point over the next couple of years. And our job right now, yes, make the points, yes, point out that there is an alternative, but we shouldn't be expecting that we're going to win, right? So we have to be preparing for when the political conditions are more favorable to our victory. And so for me, that means when the Democrats take back the House of Representatives, maybe the Senate, and when the Democrats take back the White House, maybe. But if they do, we already know that's no guarantee of success, because look what happened 4 years ago, right? Nothing happened. There was no change to our nuclear policy, posture, or budgets. So we have to have a plan for how to do that. How do we build support for this point of view that can be carried in? So when it's not just how do we do that with the next presidential campaign, but how do we do that with local candidates? How do we do that with city councils? How do we do that with congressional candidates? And we work with them to say, do you agree that if you had the ability to do it, you would reduce the nuclear weapons budget, yes or no? Right? It's things like that. And you build it, and then you're building the international and national coalitions that can have some force behind that. Because let's face it, the arms control groups are weak. We don't have clout. We have zero impact. If all of us worked right now as hard as we possibly could and we all did it together, we couldn't cut $50 from the nuclear budget. That is a $100 billion a year budget with an army of lobbyists behind it. They have completely rigged the system. Campaign contributions, paying off think tanks, the sheer money involved. So we have to have a plan for how to counter that, understanding that we're retreating right now. We're on the defensive, and we have to be preparing our counteroffensive, but we can't expect to launch it anytime soon.
Thank you. Number 4, who was questioner 4? Bring it up here. Thank you, Raven. Yes, that's a good idea, actually, to not be too close to that. Yes.
So thank you for your very inspiring talk. I think you exceeded the expectations that were set by far. I was, as a European, currently living in Germany, it hits quite close to home, literally, that to hear that there's serious talk about nuking me, you know. When you mentioned that countries like Germany, other EU countries, South Korea, Japan, we're talking about getting nuclear weapons. I was curious about your assessment of how realistic this is, you know, how serious they are about this, if any concrete steps have been taken already.
Sure. Number one, this is not a new problem. When John F. Kennedy debated Richard Nixon in the 1960 debates, he warned that if we kept on this current course, that we would soon have 15, 20, 25 countries with nuclear weapons, not the 4 that then existed, US, Soviet Union, Britain, France. There was only one authoritarian country with nuclear weapons back then. And fortunately for us, Kennedy started doing something about it, and he had a bipartisan coalition that did this. And those are 2 things that worked. One is we gave security assurances to our allies. So you strengthen NATO, you strengthen the agreement, you said no kidding around, we will defend you. Attack on one is an attack on all. If you're attacked, we are willing to use all measures of national force to defend you. But the second is that you built this diplomatic and legal framework for the prevention of the proliferation of nuclear weapons and a pathway to the reduction of existing stockpiles. And those two things had to work together. You couldn't do one or the other, and that's one of the problems with these current analysis of the new nuclear age and the right and the left. They're all about force. They're all about force. They're all about countering this, countering that, a weapon for every niche, mission. The credibility of our being willing to use nuclear force, being ready to talk about it, being ready to do it, being willing to manage nuclear escalation. That's the way these guys talk. That's dangerous. You got to get rid of that. You have to embrace and you have to go back and think about. We have to reimagine what arms control is in the 21st century. The old stuff isn't going to work anymore. There's new things we have to talk about. But this is real for countries on the front lines. Putin is coming for the Baltics. He's sending drones into Poland. Talk to the foreign minister of Finland, how Finland's feeling these days. He was just in the White House. So it's no wonder that they doubt the commitment of the United States to defend their countries with U.S. nuclear forces, and they're deciding, well, maybe we need our own, because when you do the calculations, if you're one of those countries and Putin threatens you with not just conventional force, but the threat of nuclear force, what are you going to do? And that's the problem we faced in the 50s. We solved it in the 60s. That's the problem we face now. We're going to have to solve it again. We're going to have to solve it. It's real. And if you want to see the canary in the bird, in the mine, canary in the mine is South Korea. There are major obstacles to any of the European countries I just mentioned getting nuclear weapons. It's not easy to build nuclear weapons. It's expensive. It's technically demanding. The U.S. can throw all kinds of spanners in the works to stop you from getting the material, the technology that you need to build nuclear weapons, unless you happen to be a country like South Korea that already has this stuff. And you have a population that's already in favor of you getting nuclear weapons. 80% of the people of South Korea think they should get nuclear weapons. Japan, much more difficult. The population is not for it, but if these trends that we now see continue, China growing, U.S. retreating, great powers making deals, if you were the Japanese, wouldn't you want, if you're the Taiwanese? And these are three countries that could do this relatively quickly. Frank von Hippel knows better than anybody. I believe, I don't know how many tons of plutonium Japan is sitting on. Lots. They already have the stuff. They already have the stuff for a nuclear bomb. They could probably build a nuclear bomb in 6 months. Be a really cool nuclear bomb with LED. There's countries like that that are much closer along. For Europeans, it's not easy. It's going to take a considerable amount of time. But what you're worried about is these trends, and you want to stop these trends before they get out of hand.
Thank you. Okay, questioner number 5. Who was 5?
I thought Jeffrey was 5.
Anybody going to claim number 5? Then let's go to number 6. All right.
As if the dynamic in Eastern Europe with what Poland may need to do isn't scary enough, if you were the Ayatollah of Iran and you looked at the relative fates of Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-un, why would you not want to have a bomb?
Right, exactly. Well, this is, the reason you don't want to have a bomb is because the United States will attack you if you build a bomb. So, what Iran's been doing for the last 25 years or so, a little longer, is trying to hedge their bet. Their game was to become a nuclear threshold state, so had the ability to make a nuclear bomb, but not cross the line. And they did very well at that. But they're not stupid. They understand that even that is a very risky strategy, so that's why they were willing to make a deal with us. in 2014 and 2015, a deal that worked. This was the strongest non-proliferation agreement I've ever seen. It stopped Iran from getting a bomb. It stopped a new war in the Middle East. It worked.
Yes.
Donald Trump took it apart for no reason. He promised to replace it with a bigger, better deal. Never happened. Which is why you got to pay attention to what Trump does, not just what he says. Right? There is no bigger, better deal. We had a 12-day war with Iran. We definitely set back their nuclear program, but we did not eliminate it.
Right.
And they don't have to rebuild that. They don't have to rebuild all. We don't know how many centrifuges were damaged, but let's say they got half of them. Well, you don't need thousands of centrifuges to enrich uranium for a nuclear bomb. You need a few cascades. You can do this with several hundred in a deep underground facility, and we might not see it happening because as part of the destruction of the JCPOA, you destroy the inspection mechanism that had in place so that we could see what they were doing. You know, state-of-the-art seals and cameras and agreements and inspectors all over the place. We had Iran wired. We took their nuclear program, we shrank it to a fraction of its size, put it in an iron box, and put it under a camera. It worked.
That's right.
I don't know if you can get back to that. But we're now in a situation where Iran is in a tough situation for all the reasons you all know. I mean, their allies have been decimated in the region. They've shown to be vulnerable. They don't really have good responses to a U.S. or an Israeli attack. They're changing their relations with their Sunni Arab rivals. I think they would like to make a deal. It's an extremely... Unlike 2014, there is not there's kind of a reformist government partially in place in Iran that is open to making a deal. But this is an opportunity for us, and this is where the kind of flattery you see coming out of Tom Friedman in the op-ed pages of the New York Times today, where he's flattering Trump for his Gaza deal, justifiably in my opinion. This is a major achievement. Trump stopped this war. My friend and protege and mentor Michael Crapon told me a long time ago, when the administration does what you want them to do, you applaud.
That's right.
So you thank him. You thank him. It's kind of disgusting that you got to flatter Trump in this way, right? But we try to have to, while we're trying to minimize our losses and prevent the worst from happening, you have to try to nudge the current administration into things like diplomatic relations with Iran to try to discourage them from that. But ultimately, if they feel that it's a question of their regime survival, not Iran's survival, their regime survival, they will build a nuclear weapon. They will build it. So you have to change that entire calculation, and the only way to do that is diplomatically. There's not going to be an application of military force that's going to change that calculation.
Thanks. Number 7, there we go.
Thank you for your knowledge. I've learned a lot.
I make a lot of this stuff up.
You're very good at it. What I seek is a paradigm shift of diplomacy. I feel that our diplomacy is based on the bomb. That it's based on the power of deterrence rather than the people. Is there any hope that we can somehow have a creativity that diplomacy can work on the truth we seek of working together? Is there any hope at all? I mean, you have given us the nuclear picture, and it's grim. It's grim. And I feel like we need to seek it something else. And I was wondering, with your knowledge, if you see a paradigm shift at all in our future.
The one thing you can say with a high degree of certainty is that the paradigm will change. That's what history is. That's what happens. I personally believe that I think it's a coin flip right now about which way this country goes. But because I'm an optimist, I do believe that the growing mass movement and the repeatedly demonstrated incompetence of this administration is going to weaken it to such an extent that it will collapse, that it's not going to be able to consolidate. But it's nip and tuck. So this is no time to be cheering from the sidelines, right? We have to get in. And so in that quest to do this, we have to have the courage to resist, as Pritzker says. Let's go. But we have to have this vision. And the kind of vision you need is really demonstrated by the treaty and the prohibition against nuclear weapons, because that's what they're laying out. And this is not some radical lefty vision. This is the cornerstone of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is what the Non-Proliferation Treaty was based on when we started negotiating in the 60s and got it enacted into force in 1970. It's that we are all marching down the road for the reduction of nuclear weapons. So you, other countries that don't have nuclear weapons, you promise not to get them. All of us who have them, we promise to get rid of them. It's mostly held. And remarkably, despite a lag of a couple of decades before the nuclear armed states actually started reducing their nuclear arsenals, it provided the structure for doing it. The political, the diplomatic, the legal structures for doing this. So yes, you could have that. And we've had great visionary leaders in the past in this country in our lifetime shining the light towards this path. I mean, John F. Kennedy.
Yes.
Has there been a president who articulated more passionately than that and accomplished a great deal, but ultimately not succeeding? Ronald Reagan. I mean, I thought he was the devil.
Yeah.
I would take him back in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Right? Ronald, and I'm sorry, but George H.W. Bush, the Republicans did the heavy lifting on this. They're the ones who kept reducing the arsenal. It's the Democrats who have often failed. And then we had Barack Obama with a great vision, and he was upheld by Republicans and Democrats, George Shultz, Sam Nunn, Bill Perry, Henry Kissinger, calling for a world without nuclear weapons. And we failed. We had the window. It was there. It's over. We've never done a postmortem of why we failed, so we have to analyze that. Why wasn't the vision enough? So yes, we can have that vision again, and we can articulate it. At this point, if I can go on just for one more minute on this, I actually think it's fear, not hope, that's going to propel us in the near future. So while you need the hopeful vision that there is an alternative, we have to bring home to people the danger that we are in, and that's why I'm so keen on this film, House of Dynamite. This is a film. This is done by Catherine Bigelow, who was the first woman to win Best Director for The Hurt Locker 10, 15 years ago. She's got this new film out by Netflix. It's open in theaters Friday. It's got a limited release, basically to qualify for award ceremony, and then it goes on to Netflix on the 24th. This movie opens up in great detail. You feel the characters. You see the struggles that they're having. So you identify with them. It's not cartoonish in any way. It is the most vivid, accurate description I've seen of this problem portrayed in perhaps in Strangelove, which did it in such a brilliant way. It starts with a ballistic missile is launched somewhere in the Pacific and it's streaming towards the United States. At first, people they can't believe it. It must be some mistake. No, it's real. It happens. We have a missile defense system. And they're accurately describing the missile defense system. They call it by its real name. They discuss it in great detail. The ground-based interceptor. We're going to fire this at it. We're going to intercept it. Don't worry, Mr. President, we got this. Because that's what they believe, because that's what officials actually believe. They believe this thing works, even though the scientific technological evidence is overwhelmingly that it doesn't. And in the film, it doesn't. It fails to intercept, and it fails for reasons that it failed in some of the tests. The kill vehicle doesn't separate from the booster. That happened in 3 of the tests. The interceptor that does work misses entirely. That happened in 6 of the tests. We have a brilliant report from the American Physical Society out earlier this year that details why this system won't work and why it is completely implausible any time in the next 2 decades to think we could have a system that could defend the United States against ballistic missiles. This film shows it to you. You feel it. You understand the risk that we're taking. So it's that kind of fear and what the consequences would be of a missile hitting, I'm going to keep spoiler alert here. It's headed for Chicago. It's going to impact. The president is under tremendous pressure to launch. He's being pressed to launch our missiles before that weapon can hit. It shows it to you. So it's a way for people to get it in a very visceral way. They don't have to read a scientific report. They can watch this brilliant film. That is the kind of thing that grabs people's attention. And then when they say, is there nothing we can do about it? That's where the vision comes in. That's where you then say there's something we can do. What do you think?
What's the name of the film?
House of Dynamite. Idris Elba plays the president, and one of his last lines is, "We have built a house made of dynamite, and now the walls are closing in." That is about as good a description of our nuclear dilemma as anyone I've heard.
And in that
Frank.
limited release, it's available right now at Montgomery Cinemas.
Right.
That's the one location that has it in this area for 2 weeks only before Netflix then preempts it.
Yep. All right, so Joe Cirincione, thank you so much.